The laughter echoed in the ballroom, and the sound of my father's voice cut me deeper than any knife ever could. "You are nothing to me. You should have died." In that moment, surrounded by 1,000 glinting chandeliers and the empty smiles of the city's elite, I felt a familiar kind of cold, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you question if you're even a real person. And all of it, every word, every lie, every piece of my broken past, was because my dad gave everything to my brother. If you've ever felt invisible to the people who were supposed to love you the most, if you've been told you're not enough, I want you to drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. This isn't just my story. It's a conversation about the kind of pain that only family can inflict. And if you want to hear more stories of underdogs who found a way to win, be sure to hit that subscribe button. It's not just a click. It's a promise that you'll be with me as I expose every layer of what happened that night. My name is Adam, and for as long as I can remember, I've been a ghost in my own family's house. I was the second son, the spare, the one my father never quite knew what to do with. He always said I was too soft, too introspective, while my brother, Marcus, was being groomed for greatness. I was tucked away in my room with a sketchbook, a quiet observer of the life I was never meant to be a part of. The Holts built a legacy on ruthlessness and ambition, and I simply didn't fit the mold. But I wasn't a nobody. Not really. I worked. I learned. While Marcus was out chasing women and getting into trouble, I was the one who was secretly learning the inner workings of our business. Alistair Dynamics, a company my grandfather built from the ground up, not because I wanted to take over, but because it was the only way I knew how to feel useful to my dad. It was the only way I knew how to feel like I belonged. That night was supposed to be a celebration. My father, Richard, was finally retiring, and it was the official coronation of my brother, Marcus, as the new king of the family. The air was thick with expectation, the kind that only comes with old money and a dynasty to protect. Everyone was there, the CEOs, the governors, the people who had built empires on handshakes with my father. And in the middle of it all, there was me, just a shadow in a tuxedo, waiting for the inevitable. I didn't know then that the night would end with me holding the key to a truth that would shatter my father's world. My dad gave everything to my brother, and he made it clear to the world. But he didn't know there was one thing he could never take away from me. That was the night everything I knew shattered. But to understand the full weight of that moment, you have to know what came before. You have to know what it was like growing up as the other son, the one who didn't fit, the one who was always just there. My story isn't some grand tale of rags to riches. It's a story about the kind of family you can't choose, and the kind of truth you can't ignore. It's about being born into a world where everything has a price tag, even love. My dad, Richard, was a force of nature. He built Alistair Dynamics from a small machine shop into a multinational powerhouse. He was a man who saw the world in black and white winners and losers. And he was hell-bent on making sure his sons were winners. He saw his legacy not in what he built, but in who would carry it on. He found that in Marcus, my brother was a natural. He was loud, charismatic, and had a smile that could sell ice to an Eskimo. From the time we were little, it was clear he was the chosen one. He got the first-class baseball lessons, the private tutors for his SATs, the brand new sports car on his 16th birthday. He was the golden boy, and my dad's pride in him was a tangible thing. You could feel it in the air whenever they were in the same room. And then there was me. I was the one who preferred quiet to noise, a paintbrush to a business ledger. My dad saw my curiosity as a weakness, my creativity as a waste of time. He'd look at my drawings, sigh, and say, "Adam, you'll never amount to anything if you keep your head in the clouds." It was never a direct insult, but it landed like a slap across the face every time. It wasn't just a difference in personality. It was a fundamental rejection of who I was. I remember one summer when I was about 10, Marcus and I were supposed to be at a camp my dad picked out, a leadership camp for future CEOs, but all I wanted to do was sketch the old-growth trees behind our cabin. One day, I wandered off, got lost for a few hours. When they found me, my dad wasn't relieved. He was furious. He looked at me, this 10-year-old kid, and said, "You embarrassed me. You're a liability." Marcus, of course, was lauded for his bravery in helping to find me, even though he had just stayed put and waited. That's when I first understood the unwritten rule of our family: Marcus gets the glory, and I get the blame. My mom, Evelyn, was always caught in the middle. She was the one who would come to my room after a long day of my dad's veiled insults and tell me, "Your father doesn't mean it, honey. He just wants what's best for you." But I knew she didn't believe it herself. Her eyes held a kind of quiet sadness that told me everything I needed to know. She was a silent observer, a bystander to the emotional war being waged in her own house. I never blamed her, though. How can you blame someone who's already been defeated? She had a different kind of strength, a resilience born of years of turning away from the harsh truths of her marriage. I think she loved me in her own way, but her silence was deafening. Growing up, I started to believe my dad's words. I started to believe that I was nothing more than a problem to be managed. I learned to stay in the background, to not make waves. I chose to get good grades, to do all the things that would make me appear normal in my father's eyes, hoping for some flicker of approval. But that approval never came. My dad didn't see me. He only saw a reflection of what he feared most: someone who wasn't a winner. It's crazy how you can live under the same roof as people for 20-something years and feel more alone than you do in a crowd of strangers. My story isn't unique. So many people have felt like they were the last choice, the one who was passed over. If you've ever had to fight for a place at your own family's table, I want you to comment yes or no down below. It helps to know you're not alone. And as you'll see, I wasn't either. As a kid, you just want to be seen. You just want your parents to be proud of you. And when my father's pride was a currency I could never afford, I tried to earn it with something else: hard work. It became my way of existing in that house. A silent, desperate plea for attention. While Marcus was off at parties and on vacations, I was in the library, hunched over books about business law and market analysis. I taught myself how to read a balance sheet and understand the intricacies of our supply chain. I figured if I couldn't win on charm or charisma, I could win on competence. It was an unspoken bargain with myself: I'll do all the dirty work, all the stuff my brother is too good for, and maybe then my dad will look at me and see something of value. I was wrong. My dad just saw it as my duty. He'd hand me spreadsheets late at night, telling me to fix the numbers that Marcus had messed up. I'd stay up until 2 a.m., meticulously rechecking figures, finding the errors, and making sure everything was perfect. The next morning, Marcus would present the report in a boardroom, and my dad would beam with pride. He never once mentioned my name. It was just assumed that my time, my effort, my intelligence, it was all for the family. But in our family, only one person was ever truly rewarded. The worst part was that I saw what was coming. Our main manufacturing plant in Detroit was running into serious trouble. The old machinery was breaking down, and a new union was demanding better working conditions. I spent months putting together a detailed report, outlining a plan for a full modernization of the plant and a long-term strategy for negotiation. I poured everything I had into it: late nights, canceled plans, everything. I handed it to my dad, feeling a rare flicker of hope. He glanced at it, put it on his desk without reading it, and said, "Just give it to Marcus. He'll figure it out." I felt something break inside me that day. It was more than just a paper plan. It was me, my effort, my hope all dismissed with a wave of his hand. It was a clear message, my ideas, my hard work, none of it mattered. It was all just fuel for Marcus's ascent. That's when the tension really started to grow between us. Marcus began to see me as a threat, not because I was a rival, but because I was a constant reminder of the effort he wasn't putting in. He'd make little comments, small jabs about me being the family bookkeeper or Dad's little errand boy. I would just swallow it, trying to keep the peace. But a war was already brewing under the surface, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it all exploded. And it wasn't just my dad. My mom, Evelyn, was more worried about keeping up appearances than addressing the deep cracks in our family. She'd get angry if I ever brought up the subject of my dad's coldness. "Adam, we don't air our laundry in public," she'd say, her voice tight. "Your father has worked hard to build this life. Don't you dare ruin it with your sensitivity." My pain wasn't real to her. It was just a problem to be hidden away, a messy secret that could tarnish the perfect image of the Holt family. I tried to get closer to her, to connect, but her silence was a wall I could never break through. I remember one Thanksgiving, a few years ago. My dad and Marcus were talking business, laughing about a deal they'd just closed. I was just sitting there, completely invisible. I looked at my mom, hoping for some sign, a simple glance, a small smile, but she just kept her eyes on her plate, slowly cutting her turkey. It was like she didn't see me sitting there. It was like she couldn't. I truly believe she was too afraid to acknowledge my existence in front of my father. All of this was just background noise, a constant hum of disappointment and neglect. It had become my normal. I just assumed that was the way things were, and that's the way they would always be. I didn't know that all of this, the silent resentment, the public dismissals, the years of feeling like I didn't matter, was all leading to one night, a night where everything would fall apart, and I would finally have my moment. But not in the way anyone, especially me, ever expected. That night was coming, and I didn't know that my long-term sacrifices would lead to a tragedy that would bring everything crashing down. All those years, all that striving, all those silent sacrifices. It was all leading up to one night, a night that was supposed to be a celebration, but felt more like a public execution. My father's retirement party. The Hamptons estate was packed. It wasn't a small family gathering. It was a full-blown spectacle, the kind of event where you see senators shaking hands with tech moguls, and everyone is dressed like they stepped off the cover of Forbes magazine. It was the culmination of everything my father had built, a final victory lap before he passed the torch to his golden son. I stood near the edge of the ballroom, a drink in my hand I hadn't touched. I watched as Marcus, my brother, worked the room. He was in his element, that easy charisma shining through. He laughed at all the right jokes, shook hands with just the right amount of firmness, and looked every bit the CEO he was about to become. He was a perfect reflection of my dad's ambition. He was the son my father had always wanted. I saw my dad watching him from across the room, a look of pure, unadulterated pride on his face. It was a look I had longed for my entire life, but knew I would never get. Earlier that evening, Marcus had cornered me near the bar. His smile was thin, and his eyes had that glint of mockery I knew so well. "You know, Adam, everyone keeps asking me what you're going to do now. After Dad's big announcement," he said, his voice dripping with faux concern. "I told them you'd probably open up a little art studio. You could teach finger painting to suburban kids. It's what you're good at." Right, his friends, who were standing nearby, snickered. I just forced a small smile and walked away, the sting of his words a familiar ache in my chest. He never missed a chance to remind me of my place. The air shifted as my dad walked to the center of the room and tapped his glass. The low hum of conversation faded instantly. This was the moment he would officially hand over the keys to the kingdom. He spoke of the company's legacy, of its future, of the values that had guided it. It was all a prelude to the main event. His eyes scanned the room, landing on Marcus, and a warm, proud smile spread across his face. "My son, Marcus," he announced, his voice booming with authority, "is the man I trust to carry this legacy forward. He has the ambition, the intellect, and the drive to take Alistair Dynamics to the next level." The crowd erupted in applause. Marcus basked in the moment, shaking hands and accepting congratulations as if he had already won a prize. My father continued, his voice overflowing with praise, listing all of Marcus's accomplishments and triumphs. It was a beautiful, well-rehearsed speech. And then, his eyes found me. The warmth in his voice evaporated, and his expression hardened. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. I felt a cold dread settle in the pit of my stomach. And as for my other son, "Adam," he said, pausing just long enough for the words to sink in, "you get nothing." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother, Evelyn, lowered her gaze to her glass, pretending she hadn't heard. A few people exchanged awkward glances, unsure if this was a joke. I just stood there, paralyzed, the blood rushing from my face. My father's voice, now a sharp blade, cut through the quiet. "You were never supposed to be born. I wish you had died right after you were born." It was a hammer blow. The words were a direct hit, aimed to inflict maximum pain. The room, which had been silent for a split second, erupted in a chorus of cruel, nervous laughter. Marcus's laugh was the loudest, a triumphant sound that echoed in the vast space. I felt every eye in the room on me. Every whispered word, every mocking smile felt like a physical blow. The humiliation was so profound, so suffocating, that I couldn't breathe. My entire body felt numb, as if it had been frozen by years of insults and dismissals. This wasn't just a rejection, it was a public execution of my spirit. I just wanted to disappear. I wanted to scream, to shout, to let him know how deeply his cruelty had wounded me. But my throat was a stone. I had been conditioned into silence, and in that moment, silence was the only weapon I had left. I thought that was it. I thought this was the end of the story. I thought I had been defeated. I had no idea that my pain, my humiliation, was just the beginning. I had no idea that everything I thought was over was actually about to truly begin. I didn't know that my father's downfall was already in motion. I had been humiliated, stripped of my dignity in front of an entire room of people my father wanted to impress. I stood there for a moment, the sound of Marcus's laughter ringing in my ears. The world felt like it was spinning. I wanted to run, to hide, to simply cease to exist. Every part of me, every cell, every molecule screamed at me to get out. I finally pushed back my chair, the scraping sound on the polished marble floor echoing in the stunned silence that had fallen over the room after my father's cruel words. Every step I took toward the exit felt heavier than the last, a confirmation that I didn't belong in this family, in this world, in this story. Just as I reached the edge of the ballroom, a hand reached out and pressed something into my palm. I looked down and saw a sealed envelope. My uncle, Grant, my father's older brother and the family lawyer, stood beside me. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, tired and somber, held a kindness I had rarely seen in my family. "Don't walk away yet," he whispered, his voice low and urgent. "This is from someone who wanted you to know the truth." Confusion mixed with my shame. My hands trembled as I held the envelope. For a moment, I considered slipping it into my pocket and just walking away. But something in Grant's eyes, that glimmer of genuine care, told me this was more than a token gesture. It mattered. It was important. Behind me, I could still hear the faint sound of laughter as my father toasted Marcus. moving on as though I had never existed. My humiliation hung in the air like smoke. But now, in my hand, I held something heavier. Something that might hold answers I had never dared to ask. I turned back slightly, looking at the stage where my father stood tall and proud, still basking in the power of his words. For years, I had endured his cruelty in silence. For years, I had accepted the role of the unwanted son. But now, for the first time, I held something that might challenge him. I slid my finger under the seal, my pulse pounding. If I was going to be humiliated, I wouldn't leave the room quietly. If this envelope had the power my uncle suggested, I would open it right there, in front of everyone. That decision, born from a mix of anger, pain, and a tiny, stubborn spark of defiance, would turn the night upside down. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. My fingers shook as I held it, the gold seal glinting under the chandelier light. Around me, the party continued as though nothing had happened. Guests clinked glasses, laughter drifted across the room, and the string quartet picked up again. Marcus was basking in the glow of his new crown, smiling and shaking hands, while my father accepted congratulations like a king bestowing favor. I stood at the edge of the ballroom with the envelope pressed against my palm, a new purpose filling me. I walked back to my seat, the envelope clutched tightly in my hand. A few heads turned as I returned to the table. Some guests smirked as though amused that I hadn't slunk away entirely. Marcus leaned toward me, his grin wide enough for the cameras nearby to capture. "Couldn't stay away, huh? Maybe Dad will let you sweep the hangar where the jet is parked." His friends laughed again. This time, I didn't look away. I met his eyes and held them. My silence was no longer submission. It was preparation. I placed the envelope flat on the table in front of me. My mother glanced at it briefly before lowering her gaze again, unwilling to intervene. My father noticed the gesture and sneered from the stage. "What is that? Adam? A sympathy card?" His laughter drew a ripple of chuckles from the crowd. I ignored him. My hand steadied as I broke the seal. The paper tore cleanly, the sound sharp in the quiet corner of the table. I slid out a folded letter written on thick stationery with my grandfather's name, Alistair Holt, embossed at the top. Behind it were several official documents stamped with seals I didn't yet understand. My heart pounded as I opened the letter. My eyes scanned the first line and something inside me shifted. The words were not cruel. They were not dismissive. They were filled with intent. They were directed to me, not Marcus, not my father, but me. I rose to my feet, the letter trembling in my hand. Conversations around me began to fade. People noticed my posture, my expression, the fact that I had not left after all. My father's voice faltered mid-sentence as he realized I was not disappearing quietly. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his tone sharp, his confidence cracking ever so slightly. I lifted the letter high enough for the nearest tables to see. "I am reading this aloud," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "Since you wanted to make a spectacle of me tonight, let's make sure the truth is heard, too." The guests grew quiet. Even the quartet stopped playing. Marcus laughed nervously and muttered, "He's trying to make a scene." But the silence of the room betrayed him. People wanted to know what was written on that paper. I unfolded the letter fully and cleared my throat. My eyes caught the first line again, and I spoke it aloud. "To my grandson, Adam Holt." Gasps rippled through the audience. My father's face paled. Marcus's smirk faltered. I continued, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone and my wishes have been delayed or hidden. I built Alistair Dynamics with the hope that one day it would be guided by the right hands. Not the strongest voice, not the loudest man, but the one with integrity. That man is you, Adam." The ballroom erupted in murmurs. My father stepped forward quickly, his hand raised. Enough, sit down. But I did not stop. This letter is accompanied by legal documents transferring controlling shares of Alistair Dynamics to me. My grandfather made it clear he wanted me, not Marcus, not Richard, to inherit the company. He wrote this so no one could twist the truth. The weight of the room shifted. Guests whispered. Heads turned. And I could feel eyes darting between me, my father, and Marcus. For the first time, I was not the invisible son. I was the center. My father's glass slipped from his hand and shattered against the marble floor. The sound rang out like a gunshot. His face drained of color. He looked at the documents in my hand with something I had never seen in him before. Fear. My Uncle Grant stepped forward, his voice firm and authoritative. These are binding documents. Richard, you know this as well as I do. Alistair made his wishes perfectly clear. I held the letter high. My voice cut through the silence. For years, you told me I was nothing. Tonight, we will see who was telling the truth. The ballroom froze after my uncle's declaration. The only sound was the dripping of champagne from the broken glass my father had dropped onto the marble floor. For the first time in my life, Richard Holt did not look untouchable. His jaw clenched, his fists tightened, and his chest rose and fell too quickly. The mask of control he had worn for decades cracked in front of hundreds of people. Marcus broke the silence with a bark of laughter that sounded forced. He stepped closer to me, jabbing a finger toward the documents. This is a trick some old piece of paper dredged up to humiliate us. Dad, tell them it means nothing. My father tried to speak, but his voice caught. His authority slipped like water through his fingers. These are lies, he said, though the tremor in his tone betrayed him. Uncle Grant did not flinch. He held his head high, pulling out another document from his briefcase. This is a notarized directive from Alistair Holt, witnessed by myself and 2 independent parties. The controlling shares of Alistair Dynamics are to be transferred to Adam Holt upon Richard Holt's retirement. Not Marcus, not Richard. Adam. Gasps erupted across the room. The guests, who had once laughed at my humiliation, now leaned forward with wide eyes, whispering to one another. The balance of the night shifted. I was no longer the boy mocked at his father's table. I was the man standing with the weight of the Holt legacy in his hands. Marcus's face turned red as he snatched at the papers. This is fraud. You cannot just hand him everything when I have spent my entire life preparing for this company. Everyone here knows I am the rightful heir. I pulled the documents back before he could touch them. Preparing to inherit something doesn't mean you deserve it. Grandfather saw through your arrogance. He knew who you were and he chose me. The words cut him, and his smile collapsed into a scowl. His voice rose. Desperate now. This is insane. He's a nobody. He hides in his room with his books and his art while I build a future for this company. He's soft, he's weak. He's unfit to run anything. Before I could respond, Grant's voice sliced through the tension. You can argue opinions all night, Marcus, but the law is not built on opinions. It is built on documents like these. Alistair Holt's decision is final and binding. My father staggered back, clutching the edge of the podium for support. His eyes darted between the papers and me, and then to the faces of his guests. The mighty Richard Holt, who had built his life on power and pride, looked cornered. I'd never seen him look small, but in that moment he did. I turned back to the letter in my hand and raised my voice so the entire room could hear. My grandfather wrote, "Do not let cruelty define you as it has defined your father. The empire I built was meant to lift people, not to crush them. I give it to you, Adam, because you have compassion. Do not squander it." The words echoed off the high ceilings. People murmured in disbelief. Some nodded as if the letter finally explained what they had always suspected about Richard's ruthless ways. Others stared at me with new recognition, as though seeing me for the first time. Richard finally erupted, his voice cracking under the strain. "I built this empire, my sweat, my blood, my sacrifices, and you mean to hand it all to him? A boy who never wanted it, a mistake that should not exist." His voice rose to a shout, spittle flying as he pointed at me. I will not let this happen. But the power he once held was gone. The guests no longer looked at him with admiration. They looked at him with fear, with pity, with judgment. His ranting only exposed the bitterness he had hidden for years. I stepped forward, my voice calm, but firm. "You cannot stop it. Grandfather made sure of that. You can call me weak. You can call me a mistake. But tonight, in front of everyone you wanted to impress, the truth stands taller than you do. You never had the final word." "He did." Marcus lunged toward me, but two of my father's associates pulled him back, their faces pale. They had seen enough to know where the tide was turning. The room was silent again as I placed the documents back into the envelope and held it tightly against my chest. For the first time, I felt the weight of belonging, not because I had taken something from Marcus or silenced my father, but because someone who mattered had believed in me enough to entrust me with everything. Richard slumped into a chair, his hands covering his face. The man who once commanded boardrooms, who had cowed governors and businessmen, sat broken in front of his empire. The glass shards at his feet seemed to reflect the truth. His reign had ended, not with triumph, but with humiliation. The man who once ruled boardrooms, who commanded the respect of every person in the room, was now just a crumpled figure in a tuxedo, his hands shaking as he covered his face. My father's empire had crumbled right there on the marble floor, in the shards of a broken champagne glass. The room had gone silent. The same people who had clapped for Marcus and laughed at my public humiliation now stared at me with a mix of awe, confusion, and calculating curiosity. They were all wondering the same thing: what would I do next? How would the unwanted son take control of the throne before I could even process it all? Marcus lunged at me again, his face a mask of furious betrayal. "You knew!" he snarled, trying to grab the envelope from my hand. "You and Grant planned this. This is all a fraud." But his voice, once so confident, now sounded hollow and desperate. My father's associates, sensing the shift in power, held him back. The look in their eyes was all I needed to know. The tide had turned. That's when my mother, Evelyn, finally moved. For years, she had been a statue of silent compliance, an elegant bystander in her own life. But as the crowd began to whisper and shuffle uncomfortably, she stepped forward. She didn't look at my father or my brother. Her eyes, filled with a mixture of tears and a newfound strength, were fixed on me. She reached for my hand and took it, her touch firm and warm. "Your grandfather was right about you," she whispered, her voice so low I barely heard it. "He always knew." It was the first time she had ever truly stood up for me. It was the moment she chose me. For the first time, I saw not the defeated wife of a powerful man, but a mother who was finally brave enough to break her silence. Her words, so simple, meant more to me than any company or mansion. It was a lifeline in the middle of a storm, a quiet sign that I was not alone. The ballroom quickly began to empty. The very same people who had laughed at me now lined up to shake my hand, muttering forced congratulations. Their loyalty, it seemed, was as fragile as my father's pride. I just nodded, holding onto the envelope and the documents inside as if they were a shield. I had spent so long as the invisible son, and now, suddenly, I was the most visible person in the room. Marcus, defeated, stormed out, his voice echoing with curses and promises of revenge down the long hallway. My father remained slumped in the chair, a monument to his own humiliation. I looked at him, and for the first time, I felt something other than anger. I felt pity. He had spent his entire life building an empire on fear and cruelty, only to have it all taken away by a simple truth. His reign was over. His legacy was gone. Uncle Grant came over and placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "It's time, Adam," he said, his voice quiet but full of authority. "It's time you stepped into what was always meant for you." I knew what he meant. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be lawsuits, resistance, and 1,000 people waiting for me to fail. But I also knew I wouldn't lead the way my father had. My grandfather's legacy wasn't just about money. It was about using that power for good, about building something on integrity, not on fear. I had no idea how to run a multi-billion-dollar company, but I knew I wouldn't do it alone. My friends, the ones who had been there for me when no one else was, would be my strength. I would build a team not of yes-men and sycophants, but of people who believed in doing the right thing. This wasn't just my revenge. This was my second chance. My father had tried to take everything from me, but in doing so, he had given me the one thing I had never had: my identity. I was Adam Holt, not just the spare son, but the rightful heir. And from that night forward, things would change. I would make sure of it. This was the first step on a new journey, a long road toward healing and building something truly my own. The ballroom fell silent. My father's broken world was scattered on the floor with the shards of a champagne glass. The guests, once so eager to be a part of his world, were now quick to leave it. They whispered. They stared. They offered empty congratulations before disappearing into the night, like ghosts fleeing a haunted house. The silence was heavy, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a clean slate. My father sat crumpled in his chair, a man who had built an empire on force and fear, now reduced to nothing but a broken shell. Marcus, still seething, was being led away by his own friends, a testament to how quickly power shifts. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just observing the family drama. I was at the very center of it. After the last guest had gone, the mansion felt vast and hollow. My mother, Evelyn, didn't move. She just stood there, holding my hand, her eyes still red from tears. "I'm so sorry, Adam," she whispered, her voice a fragile thing. I should have said something sooner." I squeezed her hand. I didn't blame her. I understood her silence better than anyone. It wasn't born of weakness, but of a long-ago resignation to a man she couldn't change. "It's okay, Mom," I said, and for the first time, I meant it. We stood there for a long time, just the two of us, a quiet island in the middle of a shattered world. Uncle Grant came to me then, his face tired but resolute. "The legal process begins tomorrow," he said, his voice firm. "We'll need to go to the office first thing. There will be resistance. The board is full of your father's old friends." I looked at him, and for a moment, the weight of it all, the company, the employees, the legacy felt crushing. But then I remembered my grandfather's words, the one with integrity. I was no longer a shadow. I was the one who had to stand tall. The next morning, I walked into the lobby of Alistair Dynamics for the first time, not as the forgotten son, but as the new CEO. The air was thick with whispers. Faces I had seen for years in the background of company photos now turned to stare at me with a mix of shock and cautious respect. I could feel their uncertainty. They were used to my father's iron fist. They were used to Marcus's brash promises. They didn't know what to expect from me. I called a meeting of the senior executives. They filed in, their faces tight with tension, ready for a fight. But I didn't give them one. I stood at the head of the conference table, not behind it, and spoke without notes. I told them about my grandfather's letter, about his vision for a company built on integrity and compassion. I told them I wouldn't be leading with fear or ambition, but with a different kind of strength. I told them that the days of backroom deals and ruthless takeovers were over. The company would be built on lifting people up, not crushing them. I saw a few of them exchange nervous glances, but then I saw something else, too. A flicker of hope in their eyes. They had been waiting for a leader like this for a long time. That afternoon, my father showed up at the office, unannounced. He didn't even knock on the door to my new office, his old office. He just barged in, his face a mask of rage. "You can't do this, Adam," he snarled, his voice a low growl. "This company is my blood, my sweat. You're nothing but a fraud." I didn't flinch. I just looked at him, not with anger, but with a deep, settled calm. "This company was always grandfather's legacy, Dad. Not yours. He saw what you were doing. He knew what you would become. He saw the way you treated people, the way you treated me." My words were measured, final. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm not here to take something from you. I'm here to reclaim something that was stolen from me, and from this company, a long time ago." He looked at me, and I saw a moment of clarity in his eyes. He saw that he no longer had any power over me. His cruelty, which had been his greatest weapon, was now his biggest weakness. He was a man who had traded love for power and lost on both counts. He turned and walked out. His shoulders slumped, leaving me alone in the vast office with a silence that, for the first time in my life, felt like peace. Over the next few months, things began to change. I brought in new leaders, people who believed in collaboration and empathy. I reached out to the factory workers in Detroit, the ones my dad had ignored, and started a dialogue. The work was hard. The hours were long. But for the first time, I felt like I was building something real, something that mattered. I had traded my sketchbook for a spreadsheet, but my artistic eye was now being used to see the world not in black and white, but in shades of gray, with all its complexities and all its potential. Looking back, the greatest gift my father ever gave me was nothing at all, because in taking away everything he could, he left me with a blank canvas to build a life on my own terms. My grandfather's letter wasn't just about money. It was about truth. People can try to bury it, twist it, or laugh in its face, but truth has a way of rising when the moment demands it. My father spent a lifetime convincing me I was a mistake. My grandfather's words reminded me that I was always a masterpiece. So when I tell this story, it's not just about a son who was humiliated and then vindicated. It's about a man who learned that no amount of cruelty can erase your worth when you're grounded in truth. If you've ever felt like you're an outcast in your own family, if you've been told you're not good enough, I want you to know that your worth is not defined by their voices. It's defined by who you are when the truth finally comes to light. I share my story because I believe there's a world full of people who have felt invisible, and I want to create a space where we can all be seen. So if this story connected with you, if it gave you a little hope, do me a favor, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And please, drop a comment below and tell me your story. What's a moment when you finally found your truth? The most important thing, though, is to subscribe. I'm on a journey to build a community where we celebrate stories of resilience. And your subscription means you'll be part of it. It's more than just a click. It's a promise to yourself that you're worth it. Thanks for listening.